Hi everyone, it's me again. So this time, this is actually a response to a specific question that was asked by Puppet Dude. Shout out Puppet Dude. And it's a question I've seen come up quite a bit in sort of online forums and places where people talk about puppetry. And that is, how do you come up with the voices? Because that seems to be a thing that people who are trying to get into puppetry occasionally will struggle with a little bit. And so this time I thought we'll talk about how I do the voices and what the inspirations for the specific characters are, and a little bit about sort of the philosophy of how voice work happens. A while ago I was watching a quite good interview with the famous Frank Oz, and the interviewer asked him about the voices that he did during his stint with the Muppets. And Frank, of course, notoriously prickly, gave a slightly prickly answer. But which nevertheless really drove home a good point. And it's that it's not about the voices, it is about the character. And the character is always the thing that comes first, and the voice kind of comes out of that and is as a response to that. And that's why different performers can pick up different characters and do them so long as they understand what the character is. It's not about mimicking the voice. Now, I'm going to say something slightly heretical. Stay with me. We'll bring it around. Jim Henson and Frank Oz, two of the greatest puppet performers ever. Two of the greatest performers ever, not just puppetry. And this is one of the things, is they understood performance. Neither of them, interestingly, started out wanting to be puppeteers. They started out wanting to work like creatively in television or like tell stories. That's why Frank became a director. So their interest, it was not necessarily strictly in puppetry, it was in characters. Now, here's the heretical part. Frank Oz and Jim Henson, if you were looking at them or judging them based solely on their performance as voice actors, did not have a lot of range. I know. But think about all of the characters that Jim did and all the characters that Frank did. They had maybe 2 or 3 voices that they went to, and that was it. I mean, there's a reason that, Ralph the dog and Dr. Teeth sound so similar, despite the fact that they have different speech patterns, but their voices, just strictly their voice, is almost identical. But what's different is the speech pattern, and the speech pattern is different because the character is different. And so that, I think, is probably the best thing I could say to anybody who wants to investigate how to do different voices is, don't worry about the voice strictly. It's about the character. So having said that, of course, the voice is a very important part of the character, but it shouldn't be the main focus. And you don't need a great range as a puppeteer in order to make unique characters. What you need is an understanding of how that character works and what their sort of internal motivations are. And if you can match the voice to that, then you're gold. Now, a lot of times, what I'm doing when I'm trying to come up with a voice for a character is I'm sort of matching type. So I'm thinking about other things that remind me of this personality type. And again, that's where it comes from. You start with what is the character's personality like, and you don't even need like a backstory, or you don't need anything. I mean, a lot of characters can be very simple. Like Animal, for example, is a very simple one-note character, but the personality is what's important. So think about the personality of the character and then try to think of things that remind you of that personality. So in order to make this not run super long, I'm not going to go through each character, but I think we'll do the big 3 here in this one, and maybe we'll do some more in future vlogs. So let's get into it. So I thought, of course, we'll start at the top with the star of the show, the Oracle, and his brand new beard. I have recently repaired and replaced his beard, and it's considerably fuller than it was before. I'm looking at the monitor here. Yep, it looks good. So, in coming up with the voice for the Oracle, of course, as I said before, the most important thing was the personality. And in deciding what the character was going to be, he changed quite a bit from the original concept to what we ended up with. It wasn't even a goblin at first. But the one thing that did remain the same was his personality type. And I knew that, if he was going to be the star of the show, and the whole concept was that he was a wizard from the video game that has come to answer questions about nerdy things, he would have to have certain personality traits, and so he would have to be a bit of a know-it-all. If he's a wizard, he's very imperious and very kind of full of himself, and in some ways very formal. And so, in thinking about all the different voices, particularly thinking about the wizard thing, that brought me to two main influences for how his voice should sound. So the first one is a bit surprising in that when I think of a wizard and how a wizard should sound, and because of all those character traits I talked about, they almost sound like a typical supervillain. And in thinking about that, of course, the first thing I thought of was the Monarch from the Venture Brothers, because the Monarch is kind of an amalgam of every typical supervillain, "Oh, I'm going to get you" voice that you can think of. And so that was one big influence.
Ha! That's where you're wrong, Mr. College.
Buddy, what are you going on about?
Shh, don't call me that in front of the henchmen. Keep it professional. It's my old nemesis, Dr. Venture. He's obviously followed us down here. Someone must have leaked our whereabouts to him, but who? All right, which one of you sold the Monarch out?
And the irony of that is one of the reasons I started doing these creative ventures in the first place was because some friends and I were tired of waiting for the new Venture Brothers season to happen, and so we started mucking around with the idea of doing our own thing that eventually led to the puppet show. And so to have the Monarch from the Venture Brothers be one of the influences that went into the show is kind of poetic and nice. When you listen to the Oracle, when I'm performing the Oracle, he kind of has two registers. He has the very loud and when he's making an announcement, "I am the Oracle," he's like that. But then there's a quiet register. There's when he's just sort of talking. And when he's doing that, I think probably the biggest influence there is another wizard, and it is Nicole Williamson from the 1984, I think, film Excalibur, playing Merlin. He had such a wonderfully musical quality in his voice. It was said of Nicole Williamson that he could make a single syllable last. He could sing every word. And when I listen to that, I love how unnecessarily dramatic it is. It fits very well with the Oracle because the Oracle is very dramatic. And so when I'm doing the Oracle, both in the high register and the low register, I'm actually thinking musically. I'm almost trying to sing the lines. And so, for example, take a single word, the Oracle. That's 3 syllables, Oracle, right? The Oracle would never say Oracle. The Oracle would say Oracle. There's another loop in there, And that's the thing with the Oracle, is that everything is extra, right? There's extra syllables, there's extra highs and lows, he rolls his R's, everything has to be dramatic. And that's one of the things that makes it nice when you turn that off, and he is quiet, and he has those little quiet moments where it's almost speculative, and you can see in his personality that the whole shouty supervillain thing is kind of an act, and he knows it. And so right there, we're not talking about the voice, we're talking about what his personality is like and what his sort of internal life is like. And everything you do as a voice actor should come out of that. And of course, while we've got him here, I just point out that one of the things you can't see on the show, because there's very rarely characters together, is sort of what their sizes are. And so as you can see, I got the Oracle, he's just on a stand here, so I'm not performing him. I've got some stuffing in his head to make sure that it doesn't collapse. But he's about average sort of hand puppet size. If I put my hand right next to him, you can sort of see, he's about the average size for your typical hand puppet. And now we'll get to Frankie. Well, here he is. I mentioned to somebody recently that Frankie was quite large, and they sounded surprised. And I've mentioned on social media a bit that it's physically taxing to perform Frankie because of his size. But so here we go. Here's a good example of how, you see, his head's bigger than my head. Frankie is big boy season, and he's fairly heavy too. Of course, he's got the armature inside to make his eyes blink. But he's big. So in the terms of his voice, that's actually a little bit vaguer than I can't pinpoint a specific personality, or character that influenced him, but the character of the producer changed quite a bit from the original concept to the final product, much like the Oracle himself. But the actual personality was always the same. And that was, he had to be kind of a foil for the Oracle. So he had to be in many ways the opposite of the Oracle, in that he was very plain-spoken, he was very practical, and he was slightly sarcastic, and he would sort of see through and point out the foibles in the kind of over-dramatic nature of the Oracle. And all of those things are things I think are intrinsic to the kind of New York attitude. And so when I went to voice Frankie, immediately I thought, New York. No specific region of New York either. I actually researched this a bit because, I'm obviously doing a regional accent when I do Frankie, but I wasn't even sure what region it was. And so I did a bit of hunting around on YouTube. My wife and I sat down one evening and we kind of went, what are the actual regional accents of New York like? Because there's a lot. And it turned out that he's kind of a mix of Queens and Brooklyn. And a little bit of Manhattan, because I spend most of my time in New York. I spent in Manhattan, so there's a big influence there. But he's kind of pan New York City. One really interesting thing about Frankie's voice, at least for me, is that when I'm watching playback and when I'm editing, I can sort of hear my own voice in every character. Now, of course, people often say when they hear themselves recorded, oh, that doesn't sound like me. And that's because when you hear your own voice, you're hearing through bone conduction, and it's a different process than hearing it through actual, like sound waves. So when you're hearing it through sound waves, that's how you actually sound. When you're hearing yourself recorded, that is much closer to your actual voice than what you hear in your head. And of course, I've heard myself recorded so much that it's not even a thing for me anymore. So when I watch playback, I can hear my own voice in every other character except Frankie. When I'm watching Frankie, it's like I'm watching another performer. And that's super interesting to me. And I'm not even sure why, but it's really fun because I can kind of enjoy Frankie's performance a little bit more than the others because I'm less kind of personally invested. I'll watch playback of Frankie and I'll sometimes go, I don't remember doing that little eyebrow movement or whatever. It just kind of happens. And that's when you're kind of in the zone and you've got it. Frankie was built by Kevin Gorby of Luna's Puppets. Shoutouts to Kevin Gorby. He was like a custom build your own puppet. And our next example was also built by Kevin Gorby. He was not a custom job, but nevertheless, he's a lot of fun. Good old Gus. Gus is probably the easiest one to explain his influences. Now, when originally the concept came up that we were going to have a marketing person, Gus wasn't in the picture at all. It was originally going to be a human character, a humanish character, I should say, that was sort of like a tech bro surfer dude. And I couldn't quite find the voice in that. I kept trying to do it, and like I would kind of get there and it would just sort of fade away. And it wasn't great. It didn't seem like the kind of character that could be dynamic and entertaining. And then Kevin Gorby of Luna's Puppets was having a sale on this particular model that he performs, which I think is called a Zazzle. So I grabbed one and I looked at him and I thought, well, he looks kind of like a Yeti. And then the idea, the words marketing Yeti just seemed funny. And I don't know why, I still don't know why, but marketing Yeti is funny. And so immediately that's what happened. That's replaced the surfer dude idea. And then of course, looking at him, I kind of went, well, here's an example of sometimes the design gets dictated by the character, and other times the character gets dictated by the design. And when I looked at how intense that he looked, I thought, well, he's like intense marketing guy. He's like that Tony Robbins kind of, spouting out buzzwords kind of guy. And so when I was thinking of a voice for that, the first thing I thought of was like every Casey Kasem-esque 1950s DJ on the radio, shouting out your Saturday night. But more specifically, and this is one place where I'm glad we actually have a very specific thing to point to. There is a furniture store in Canada, I think it's all of Canada, called The Brick. And in the ads that they have done since I was young, they've had the same announcer, and I believe he's still working, named Michael Bell. and his voice is just the most over-the-top announcery kind of voice. I have to believe that they're playing it for laughs because it's just so over the top. He is specifically the model for Gus.
It all starts Wednesday, 6 a.m. The Brick's famous Boxing Day blowout. Boxing Day only at the Brick.
So there you have it. There's some of the influences and some of my process behind how I come up with the voices. I cannot stress enough that it is much more about the character than it is the voice. And I mean, I have an okay range, but it's not limitless. I'm not Billy West, who can seemingly do any voice ever. In terms of practical advice, I do work on the voices quite a bit because voice work has been something that I've been interested in for quite a while. And so I probably work on my voice work a little bit more than a lot of puppeteers. And if anything, I think I'm probably guilty of leaning on the voice a little too much, more than the performance. And that's something that I actually think is something I can improve and work on, because I know that the voice is pretty good, and so I'll use that as a bit more of a crutch than I should. But one of the things that I have found that has helped me the most is I'll just try and talk in character, even when I'm just going about my daily business. And then thankfully, my wife is at work during the day, so I'm walking around and just talking to the cats. And I'm sure my neighbors must think I'm a bit loopy because I'm walking around talking like this to the cats. But it does help, and it does help you be able to sort of jump in and jump out of the character really quickly. A lot of the time when I'm doing something that is like two characters are interacting off camera, I'm not recording those separately. I'm just jumping between the characters. And it's tough to do on command, but it is something that if you work at it, you can do. And the way to work at it is to just do it, to just like rehearse your lines, but more importantly, rehearse talking like that character just in everyday life, if you can find people who aren't going to look at you like you've got three eyes. So there we go. Hope you enjoyed this. There's enough characters now. I'm looking around the room. Yeah, there's enough characters now that we can do this again. So I'll probably do another vlog later on about the more characters and what their influences are. And I hope you enjoyed this, and we'll see you next time.